So what I'll do now is I'll go on to the weathering, and like I'd started to say about the weathering products that I've developed for Alclad is they're oil-based, artist's oils. So what I did was I went to our paint manufacturer and I asked them a simple question. I said, how can I gave him some samples of the other stuff, and I said, how can I make this better and use artist's oil paints because it's better paint? And he just told me that there's two types of thinner, and that I won't tell you what it is because then that would give away the whole game. But there are two types of thinner that counteract the deterioration of the paint, the pigments in the paint. And this one thinner that we've added to this recipe, what it does is it keeps what's called skinning. So if you've ever used any of the other washes, after you've opened them once and used them, there's the pigments, there's a film that you can never get rid of completely. It's always there. And that's, it's just a simple tragic fact of the matter that it's all thinned with this white spirit. So what we've done is we've added our own 50-50 mixture of thinners, but also this ingredient that keeps the paint from skinning. And that's as simple as it is. But it was just a matter of going in and speaking to the guy and saying, look, you've made paint since 1922. You've made paint for the RAF. You've made paint for oil rigs and all that sort of stuff. So I want your expertise on how can I make this the best stuff on earth. And so that's all we did. And that was as simple as it was. A request to make something that I'd be proud to put our name to. But you can see it retains its mixture quite well. And that comes in particularly handy when you're working on the model. So I just put it on general all over the place. What I did yesterday was a gloss coat with an acrylic gloss varnish. Aquagloss is what I use from Alclad. But I'll give the entire model a good solid coat, a couple of coats if need be, 2 or 3 coats to protect the paint, the lacquer or the enamel, whichever I've used, from the thinners. Especially, it's particularly important when you're working with aircraft and when you're putting decals on, is that you want a really glossy, shiny surface, because then you lose the edge of the decal film, the carrier film of the decal. You could lose that on the gloss surface, and then when you go and varnish over top of that, put your matte varnish on, it just disappears. This should hopefully run very easily down the model into the panel lines. So I'm going to try and when it came to me deciding how I wanted to weather my models or what I wanted my aircraft to look like, it was simply a matter of, it's not so much what you put on the model, it's more what you take off the model that's important when it comes to weathering. With this mixture here, the reason I don't do what these guys, pin wash is what they call it, and they try and just keep it to the panel lines or whatever, is because what I do to the model, this first wash has about 3 rolls, and it's like a 2-step procedure where just put it on all over, liberally everywhere. And so what this is going to become is, it will become my method for highlighting the detail, very subtly highlighting all the detail on the model. If I didn't have a decent coat, that would just eat straight through the varnish into the paint, and you'd have all this horrible lifting effect. Ideally, what you want to do right now is leave it for a couple of hours. And the beauty about these washes is I've tested them to the extremes, and found out the working tolerances that this stuff has. You can work on it for about 36 hours. So you got a day and a half of it being on the model that you can take some off, add some more to it, make it look different. And you can do that for, like I said, about 36 hours working time, which is quite good. Because these are designed for armor as well as aircraft, I've got like rust, which isn't going to be too much use on aircraft because, as we know, aluminium doesn't oxidize like that. It builds up in white. Oxidized aluminium is white. But so the range covers some streaks I've got a couple of streaks. Obviously the range is going to expand, but what I want to do is I want to create sensible colors rather than make a color for every conceivable different scenario on a model. On the wing, essentially all I'm going to do for the rest of the weathering process is remove the bits that I want to remove so that it looks how I want it to look. And that's all the weathering process is. But what you see when it comes to stuff like this, you want to, if you look at it, like if you look at these here, it's quite sort of two-dimensional. All these the little circular recesses. It looks very two-dimensional, but once you stick some wash in there, it gives it some depth, and it gives it more of a scale appearance, so that it's not a little plastic model. It looks like it's something that's real. And that's all you're trying to do with the wash. You're not trying to sort of hide any defects or I don't know, but all you want to do is highlight the existing detail on the kit. The reason that you want to leave it for a couple of hours to dry is if you start working too quickly, what you do is you end up pulling the wash out of the recesses, so like in the panel lines. But here, I think this bit is going to be dry enough to start working with. It's more important about what you take off the model. Following the airflow, I want to add some subtle, very subtle streaks effects. So if I keep using the brush, following the direction of airflow as it goes over the wing, but I've also kept it in the panel lines. And as you can see, as I go each pass with the brush, I remove more and more of the wash. And so where you look at this, if you look at this side and you say, good God, he's ruined it, it's awful, it looks terrible, then you look at where we've been removing some of it, and there we can see it's getting back to, there's spots where there's bright, shiny airframe aluminium coming through, but that's as easy as it is. I dare say that anybody could do it. This is where it gets a little bit more complex, because what you've got is, if you're thinking conscientiously about what you're trying to achieve with the weathering, you want to follow laws of gravity first and foremost, but also aerodynamics. And so, like I said, on this part of the wing, where the airflow is directing everything back, so if you've got leaks, then the leaks are, as the aircraft, if it's sitting on the ground, the leaks are just going to drop down. But as the aircraft takes to the skies, and it's got all this residue from leakages, that's going to get pushed back over the wing. So that's why you want to keep going this way. But on a place like this, where when the aircraft, and I've seen people do this as well, they weather it and it's like beautiful streaks going down the side of the model, and then it's a tail-sitting airplane, so the streaks should really be going this way down the model, right? So it looks kind of odd, because all that streaking that you would see there would only happen when it was sitting on the ground. And because I'm working so quickly, after putting the wash on the model, is I'm desperately trying to find places on here that are dry enough for me to work with, so we're not standing around here looking at me do nothing. Get rid of all the residue that's on the brush so you can start fresh. But that's the beauty of this stuff as well, is that we're now sufficiently dry in most places that I can start working a little bit more rigorously. A lot of guys like to use cotton buds, and you can soak them, dip them in thinner, but I find that when I dip them in thinner, it takes off too much, and then when it reanimates the wash itself, then you can start pulling the stuff out of the recesses. But you know, the cotton bud is quite a good and effective way of removing quite a lot at once, and it's very absorbent. So this is just going to take, you can see where we started out with what any rational person would say, well, that's a bit heavy, that's a lot of wash on the model, you've ruined it. You can see, and over the white, this should be quite a good example as I take it off. And you can see, if you were doing like a tank or something like that, where I've left this streak here, you can imagine on the side of a Sherman tank where the fuel caps are that dripping down the side, you just leave streaks and all that sort of crap in there. I'm just going to leave those two streaks there because I like the thought of playing with them a little bit. So you can see It's very subtle, but in all these recessed rivets, I've just picked up all that detail very easily. And it's not like black, it's not pure brown, it's just the right mixture. The guy who made this used 85% raw umber and 15% Payne's gray to make a color that was darker than like a pure brown, but also not black. So it looks convincing, and that's the effect. I think it's quite a good wash to start as a base. This side of the wing has had a little bit more time to dry, so it's a little bit easier to work with to get more of what I want off the model. If you want it to be not very heavily weathered, quite lightly weathered, you just keep removing more and more. Do filters or different washes on top of that, like I'll put on some fuel streaks and stuff. But if I was going to do different, I'd leave it overnight, give it a day to dry that wash, let that dry, and then so when you start putting the next wash on top of that, or the next, like a filter or other effects, you've given that time. It won't reactivate the wash that's already on there. That'll be nice and dry, and then you won't end up pulling all the wash out of the lines. And then you decide at one point, there's a little voice inside your head that says, okay, that looks right. You've done it. And then at that point, you should stop. And I'll show you a trick here that I like to do. That's good enough. Right. So, I'll take a very small amount of, all right, we'll go from the, say, edge of the wheel well. And obviously this is going to be very big, but it'll show you what basically. So what I'm doing is basically putting the base down for oil streaks. And so what I'll do is keep building it up, put a little bit more of the wash onto it. And this is what they call streaking effects or whatever it is. But that's just a wash that they've used in a different method. So what I'll do is put a little bit more. And this one really doesn't show off its qualities until it dries. When this stuff, when the sand and light earth, when this stuff dries, it looks awesome. It really does. Even I was a bit surprised with the first batch results. I'll stick it in the wheel well. And ideally, how you want to build the light dust or sand, whatever you want it to represent, you want to build it up so it's pooling, so that when the carrier agent or the thinners, once that dries, then it just leaves the pigment essentially in hopefully where you wanted it to go. You can see it's starting to give it a bit of a dusty, dirty look. For me, I like it to be quite weathered, but in a convincing fashion. Get it. The beauty stuff about Alclad, and that's the one thing I've always sworn by, is you don't need to worry about the mixture. It's already done. I don't have to bother. It's just boom, straight out of the bottle onto the model. Thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate your time. No worries. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, guys.